Alright, hello everybody and welcome. Today we got some interesting info. We basically got kind of the feedback update from the Deimos Arcana test server things. So basically, if you have not seen my impressions on the test server and everything that I experienced there, that is up from a stream highlight as the previous video. This is essentially going to be the changes that DE is making, not counting bug fixes and stuff. Going into the actual update from what we experienced on the test server. Obviously, them taking feedback is great. But we're going to talk about whether or not these changes matter and how they're trying to fix certain things, as I think it's kind of interesting. So, let's get into this. First and foremost, their kick-on weapon and arcane changes. Generally speaking, the major focus this week was to split between weapon tweaks and major arcane buffs to give another chance at usability. The arcane readability numbers and more have been significantly reviewed and changed for Deimos Arcana. So, weapon buffs. So for this, we have the Bubonico, which was a weapon that on the test server I liked. More accuracy on the primary fire. That seems great, as it had a pretty wide spread. Making this more accurate will make it easier to get headshots, which is good. Faster, less delay between regenning ammo seems great. Way more ammo regen seems great. Status chance on the alt fire goes up, which super unnecessary, but good stuff. And then a decreased primary fire rate from 4.16 to 3.83. I think in the end, this is actually going to be kind of equaling out the increased accuracy of the primary fire, because you're going to be able to get considerably more headshots, and it's going to be a little bit more controllable with the fire rate decrease, but you are going to lose the damage from the fire rate going down in your, absolute maximum possible output. So overall, we've got three really positive changes to what's going on here, and then kind of a just feel change with increased accuracy but slightly less fire rate, as those kind of cancel each other out in terms of damage output, I would think, in general, but will change how the weapon will feel to use. So Bubonico seems like these are generally positive buffs to it, and it seemed like it was pretty good already, so good stuff. The Sporothrix, the damage is increased, and it reduced the embed time from 3 to 0.9 seconds, so this thing is going to explode very fast, and then its flight speed was also increased pretty significantly. So it's going to be very easy to just make things explode, and they are going to hit harder. This is going to, increase the viability of this weapon by a good chunk, and that's much more exciting for use with this, with larva and other grouping type abilities. Then we have the Proboscis Ceranos, which is increased pull strength of the tentacles, and the ammo pool was increased as well. Depending on how much this pull strength was increased, this is going to fix the problem that I had with the Ceranos, was that it was maybe a little slow. But this seems like it could potentially turn this weapon into a grouping weapon, which is kind of the ideal, that you'd have larva or a larva type effect on a primary weapon slot. As the primary weapon slot, if it's not going to be used for damage output, which it often is not currently, it could be used for utility. And then we have the Catabolist. The Catabolist was, already, I thought, quite good. Pretty excited to use it. Adding base punch through on this, fantastic. Making the clip size 27 instead of 19 seems way better, somewhat needlessly. Increase the ammo pool from 95 to 135. Means you're just going to be able to utilize it for longer. Generally, the ammo would definitely be a problem at 95, but it's not going to be that much better at 135, I don't think. But these two changes definitely matter quite a bit, especially the base punch through, as this is going to make it even better with things Kora's and any kind of grouping ability, Vauban's Vortex, all those things. It's going to make the Catabolist much more appealing with the punch through being added. The Pulmonars get more attack speed. Pulmonars seemed fine. They seemed like some solid nunchucks. Having their attack speed go higher will make them more solid nunchucks. And then the Arum Spinoza, spine damage is from 60 to 70, and then spine flight speed from 33 to 49, increased accuracy of spine throw. This probably does nothing. It probably does nothing. The crit stats on the Arum are really bad. And the spines are a heavy attack functionality. So like, ideally, you know, maybe you could build for heavy attacks on these, but I really doubt that that's going to be a thing you can do with great success. But it'll probably be viable at the very least with these, because, you know, potentially just doing like a heavy attack crit build, maybe that works out for the Arum, but I'm gonna lean towards probably not. Now, these things, basically they made better all of the weapons that I was already excited to use, with the exception of the Arum Spinoza. So I'm way into that, even though that seemed not necessary, honestly. Besides that, we have the Arcanes, which are bad across the board, or at least were bad across the board. We're going to look at these and their changes. So, notable changes include residual Arcanes will now leave their AoE at the position of the enemy at the time of death. You'll see a ring on the ground with upgraded FX that you can enter to begin your residual/theorem buffing process. This means you'll not need to search for corpses that may have been blown off into the distance. Instead, you have an easier and faster means of finding these AoE rings. This is a huge functionality boost. I want to give DE credit. This is a fix that is definitely worthwhile, because you'll be able to easily know where these AoEs are, as opposed to how finicky it was on the test server. That is considerably better. Also, whenever it spawns at the place of death, usually enemies tend to be grouped together. So it'll more easily, the residual Arcanes will more easily affect enemies around where the guy died. So that is definitely an improvement. Significantly increase the active duration of your stacks after leaving the AoE. They quadrupled it to 20 seconds. And then Theorem Arcanes now go up to 5 ranks with stats to reflect this. So Theorem Arcanes now go up to 5 ranks. They already did go up to 5 ranks. Unless, I don't know why this is a thing here, because there were already 5 ranks. So that's a weird one for me, but whatever. Moving on, let's look at these. So before standing in a zone created by a residual arcane, increases damage of companions and summoned allies within 60 meters by 4%, stacking up to 15 times. Effect persists for 20 seconds upon leaving the zone. This is with the increase there. Now this is the new one, which is the same, except for it is within 90 meters by 24%, stacking up to 15 times. Effect persists for 20 seconds upon leaving the zone. So, increases damage of companions and summoned allies, 90 meters, 24%, 15 times. So, they have multiplied the percent increase by 6, and I'll be 100% honest. I wasn't kidding whenever I said that you could actually add 6 zeros to all of the numbers in this effect, and it still probably would only be a meme, because, like, I was very serious. If this was 4 million% and this was 15 million times, and, like, you know, 60 million meters for 5 million seconds, like, that's probably actually not that good. Which is, you know, increasing it to 24%, it's an attempt. It is a multiplication times 6 of stats. I think they, you know, maybe they should try a multiplication of this stat by like at least 100, to see if you can make it work with companions. Hey, maybe they tried this with like a really hyper niche Necros build and got it to do a thing. I'm sure people will try it out. Maybe it'll work. Probably not. But hey, at least number did go significantly up. It's got that going for us. And then Theorem Contagion, which is, this is the globe one. So basically, standing in a zone created by Residual Arcane creates globes that orbit the player every 2 seconds. The globes will strike the nearest enemy within 5 meters, dealing 100, and apply a status effect. Globes will persist for 8 seconds upon leaving the zone. Now, the effect is standing in a zone, residual globes. The globes will strike the nearest enemy within 15 meters, so times 3 on that effect, dealing 150 damage and increasing their vulnerability to the globe's damage type by 200% for 6 seconds. Globes will persist for 30 seconds upon leaving the zone. So this is... I still think that this is just a meme, because, like, in theory, you'd be using the residual, the heat residual, and then getting increasing vulnerability to the globe's damage type by 200%. So like 200% like weakness to fire damage, let's say, or any of the available base damage types. So you could theoretically use this to get more damage with Ember, but that is so much work, and like it's just not worth it. Just like for what you put in, you don't get what you'd expect out, and Ember can more than handle herself in like pretty much all content as it stands currently. Even though she's on maybe like the lower end of some of the top tier Warframes that can do that type of stuff. I don't think this type of effect is going to help Ember out, and I think Ember is maybe the only use case where you'd use this. So that's a bit unfortunate. And then Theorem Demulcent, standing his own residual arcane, increases weapon damage by 4%, stacking up to 15 times. Effect persists for 5 seconds upon leaving the zone. Standing in the zone created by a residual arcane increases weapon damage by 12% a second, stacking up to 15 times. Effect persists for 20 seconds upon leaving the zone. So, multiplying this by 3 is pretty good. 270% weapon damage whenever this is fully stacked, which I believe is correct. If it's not correct, I'll have the correct number on screen. Is pretty solid. And the effect persisting for, like, not no amount of time whatsoever. And the weapons themselves being what you're using to proc the residuals, which are used to feed into the theorems. Like, maybe some people will opt to use these if they're cheap enough. Like, tripling this number, that might actually be worthwhile. Like, maybe, like, there's a possibility that it's actually usable. If you're trying to go for, like using specific weaponry and you want to like, get heat procs from your main damage and then use this. I think it's close. It's really, really close. I think that some changes to the like residual arcanes like AoE or something might make this maybe actually appealing. I think the really rough part for the purposes of using this is that you have to use a kit gun type weapon in order to get there. If we had an arcane slot on kind of, all weapons, then I think this one becomes considerably more appealing. And the reason for that is because, like, if you've got 2 guns in your loadout, one of them could have a residual, and that's probably not too big a downside if you're getting a huge % bonus like that you've stacked up. Like, there's actually, this one's close. Like, if this one's not actually usable at this point, this one's maybe actually pretty close to being usable, especially depending on how easy it is to get a hold of this one. And, it took tripling and then quadrupling, but, it's nice that this one's pretty close to maybe being usable. Other arcane changes. Theorem Infection increased from 90% to 360% companion damage at max rank attacks, which we just went over. Residual Boils spawn cysts on the ground inside the trigger instead of on the enemy corpse, and the Residual Shock now fires lightning from a spike instead of the enemy corpse. So these are just visual changes, these two, but it'll be much more obvious what's happening. So yeah, there's that. Then Warframe abilities and Augment changes. So a number of Warframes got really meaningless changes that are technically improvements, but, whenever it's a meaningless technical improvement, it's not really much of an improvement. So they have made some further changes to what we can expect to be getting. So for... I'm going to read what is expected here. We focused on the most consistently critiqued Warframes for this week with some explanations on what's to come outside of this week. Generally speaking, we felt Zephyr needed the most attention, and while people appreciated aspects of Atlas and Necros, there was more work to be done on their kits as well. I fully agree with the premise of this. So, moving into here, Chroma. In addition to being able to select elements in mission in real time, the biggest change, Chroma's selectable element HUD now uses color coding in addition to icon coding. Sure. Awesome. Great. Increased spectral scream damage from 200 to 400 damage per second at max rank. This combined with 100% status chance of chaining should lead to some more deadly or useful scenarios, especially since you can use all 4 elements now. So, for this, doubling the damage probably makes this a thing you could use on, like, star chart enemies to some effect. Probably just not useful still. The big thing that Spectral Scream really needs is this basically needs to be able to proc whatever element is being breathed at like an absolutely insane tick rate in order to be useful. Like, it needs to be an Ignis on crack cocaine in order for anyone to even consider, like, you know, dropping your weapon and going into Spectral Scream for the purposes of using this. So I don't like, this is it's doubling the damage, but I don't think that's going to actually matter for Chroma actually using it outside of just like, you know, just rink-a-dinking around on the star chart and being like, these enemies that are level 20 sure do die to this. But I guess that will be fun for some people to actually have it be useful even there. And then Necros. Necros' Soul Punch now has a new mechanic. Once again, we have the second new mechanic for Necros' 1 for this update, marked for Harvest. Enemies that are hit by Soul Punch but don't die have a duration wherein they'll be eligible to become a shadow if killed while marked. This is in addition to the 25% lethality change and shadow healing. So, this is an ability that is not conceptually bad, but I think kind of just puts out, like, how do I put this? This ability needs a more fundamental change, right? That's really what it comes down to, is that this ability needs a more fundamental change, because like marking one enemy and then shooting them to like transform them into a shadow, sure, that's cool, but like it would be, I think this ability needs to be kind of just reworked in general, right? Because like what does this ability do now that they're like trying to get us to use it? It was a knockdown and damage. Nobody used Soul Punch. They gave it a revive with an augment, which some people have attempted to use sometimes, but not really. It's never actually been like good. They gave it a 25% instant kill threshold and like create a shadow and shadow healing, and that's not good and bad. And then now it's new mechanic. You mark them, and then if you kill them within the time limit, they become a shadow. Like, it's so many like extra effects on top of this, and even at this, it seems like it's gonna be pretty tough to really want to use this unless it's in an AoE. Like, straight up, unless you can like Soul Punch a guy at the front of like a line of enemies, and then it hits a bunch of the dudes, and then you kill all the guys and they all become shadows, then I don't really see this being particularly useful. But maybe it's worth casting sometimes. Like, I mean, some people use Shield of Shadows Necros still, so I'm sure they'll be much more likely to cast one on enemies to heal their shadows or whatever. But I think there are fundamental issues with Soul Punch, and its functionality probably needs to be looked at in general more so than like just like a complete like redo of the Soul Punch ability from the ground up is probably more in order than just adding abilities on it until it seems useful enough. Anyway, though, moving on, let's talk about Zephyr. The focus for this week was all about Airburst, making the explosion valid for damage scaling changes. The stakes when hitting groups with this ability, which was a detail a few feedback posts requested or tried to make sense of. Airburst now deals 35% additional damage per enemy hit, either with the projectile or the explosion damage. Airburst now has a 50% chance of dealing a physical status effect hit by this slice of air, or its explosion radius heavily skewing towards slash. So, this is like not, I don't think that this addresses the issues that Zephyr actually has, but it is better. There's some chance that this could do enough damage to groups that you'd cast it for like the slash procs to deal okay damage, but maybe it's just me, but I really feel like the damage output of Airburst was never really the thing. Like, it'd always be cool for it to have damage output, but I would really just like it to actually pull enemies together. That's really my whole thing, is that I just want it to have enemies actually group up whenever I cast it. And then, like, the problems with Zephyr's new 4 functionality is that she can't actually put her tornadoes where she wants still. they do still just spawn on whatever enemies they decide to sit on, and then they just don't move from there, which is, you know, also maybe not, it's not super great for like her usability either. But that's, you know, I mean, they made Airburst do more damage. That for me, that doesn't really seem like that's gonna help Zephyr hugely. Like maybe there will be a weird Airburst build that like maxes out range and does some strength or something. But I mean, we'll see on this. I'll test it to see if it does anything. But I would definitely have preferred more ability to group up enemies and actually get them into the tornadoes so that you could do the tornado interactions and kind of go through Zephyr's kit, as I've talked about in like the recent overview of the Deimos Arcana stuff I experienced, and also in the rework video that I put out for Zephyr. But yeah, I mean, these are testable changes that I maybe hope will be good, but I don't think personally that it's kind of what Zephyr was looking for. And then for Atlas, overall, we still intend to look more at Atlas's tectonics, but due to some AI complications and gotchas, we had to reset a timeline to revisit this with a future batch of abilities. For now, those who saw a slight utility boost to the AoE damage / stagger we added to Tectonics Bulwarks will benefit from what was observed on the public test cluster. So we know that Atlas will be receiving more changes in the future, which he direly needs. Hopefully looking less at Tectonics and more at Atlas overall, because Atlas is a Warframe that, while he does not explicitly struggle overall, he struggles in comparison to most of his like niche competitors. And what I mean by that is, like, if you look at what Atlas's output is with his exalted type weaponry and compare it to the other Warframes, most other Warframes are getting the same or better crowd control with better damage and just more interaction, and also it oftentimes, with an exception, which is Korra, more tankiness than Atlas possesses as well. So Atlas in general, I think, needs a slight boost up, but it's good that they'll look at Tectonics again, as Tectonics is probably still his worst ability outside of just doing some hyper-specific weird AI things with Tectonics. And then for Garuda's Bleeding Talons augment, generally speaking, with the action we felt necessary to take for launch surrounding Garuda's augments, all other augments performed as expected, either in general or within their niches. There was consistent feedback about Garuda's having a feel issue. We have trimmed the animation time, if released early, and increased the range up to 9 meters for this augment. So they're giving it 2 extra meters, which does help, and the animation being faster will actually matter. So the animation time is going to matter a lot less than the range increase, and we'll see if this can maybe make the augment squeeze into some builds for doing like Breach Surge Garuda. I think that 9 meters is probably still going to be too low. I think the sweet spot for it being like a heavy consideration, but like a hard choice, is probably 12 meters, and the easy include number is probably 15 meters. But at 9, we'll see if it seems somewhat worthwhile to include if the animation time is like that much increase. Like if you can essentially hit 4 so fast that you're hitting 3 or hitting Breach Surge at the exact same time, maybe this sees a niche use case. But in general, I think that this is going to be just slightly too little range to see a bunch of use, but it'll be worth testing, so there is at least that. Steel Path and Acolyte changes. So this one has caused some hubbub with the testing. So I'm going to read out their reasoning here, because I actually really like the reasoning that is provided here. In addition to written feedback and the poll results, we did a full statistical review of the amount of Steel Essence earned this weekend on both test and live, and we are moving forward with the values provided on the test cluster. 3 per Steel Essence Incursion Alert, and 2 per Acolyte, eligible for resource amount boosting. We settled on these values because of what happens when they're broken down by different acquisition methods. People gain Steel Essence at better rates when playing normally, i.e. no AFK macro detected. In practice, the actual dependency on RNG and Xmas spawning is gone. You'll have a stable, matchmaking-friendly way to reliably earn Steel Essence in shorter intervals across more content. In our view, it's better to reward broader, diverse play then hyper reward idle strategies, and the stats confirm this to be the case. On paper, the absolute top 1% of missions will see less steal essence per hour, i.e. the single strategy AFK macro run. Every other mission strategy will see more. So, this is really good reasoning, and I fully agree with this. I hope that this reasoning gets used in the future, because this is exactly what I feel like many people would like to see. Is in general, doing a lot of different things is rewarding, as opposed to doing just one thing a lot. I think that has value across, like, just doing a variety of content in Warframe and not just, doing the one thing. And that's fair. So overall, we're going to get less steal essence, for those of us that were able to do like the big many hour long runs for Xmas and stuff to get all that steal essence. But in general, people are going to be able to just click on a mission, have better matchmaking for it, and get their steal essence on a like day-to-day, week-to-week basis. Also, down here, Steel Path Acolytes now have received the same status effect eligibility treatment that Liches received in Update 27.3 earlier this year. This means we have slightly increased their health, scaled by squad size, as the status effect eligibility makes them easier to kill. So this is really good. I'm really happy that they're coming back to status effect eligibility for kind of boss-like enemies, and this is going to be a thing we're also going to talk about in a second because it was added to something else. But we've also got reduced melee attack damage on both Misery and Malice to avoid the more reported one-hit KOs, created more regular spawn windows for Acolytes, and fixed issues with them not spawning after 30-minute missions. They are guaranteed in each mission and endlessly guaranteed in endless missions. So they are endlessly guaranteed in endless missions, so you're going to keep getting Acolytes if you want to do endless in the Steel Path, which I think is cool. And like, they're endlessly guaranteed, which is great. And them being guaranteed in each mission means that whenever you're just regularly going in Steel Path, you're going to get way more steal essence as you're just generally clearing the nodes, which I feel has a considerable amount of value, because whenever you're clearing through that content, some missions can be pretty boring, but this will help at least make them more rewarding in doing them. So that's good. This stuff for the Steel Path, I ended up being pretty happy with overall. And, like, they're adding Umbral Forma to it. They're giving it, like, a solid reward that people are going to desire. So people will probably be doing this content. In addition, bounty changes. Pacing and bugs for the new bounty types have been reviewed with some specifics to call out. The Polyp Juggernaut bounty decreased the frequency of random Juggernaut sniffing by over 50% to improve pacing. This is a hilarious patch note that does actually improve the mission quite a bit. The Juggernaut is faster, increased the likeness of a truffle being closer to improve pacing. General pacing improvements. Enemies now spawn on your Polyp Juggernaut's position, making the battle phase more engaging. So basically, they have taken what this bounty was, which is basically just following the Juggernaut around, and just sped the whole thing up, which is great because the Juggernaut bounty was definitely going to feel a bit slow. So this is moving it faster and like making the enemies just drop right on top of you so you can kill them right away and move on. Like, that seems like that's going to make it also a little bit more difficult, so a little bit more engaging there. So good stuff on the Juggernaut bounty. That's going to improve quite a bit. I do like the flavor of this bounty, so that'll be nice. Purifier bounty. Purify cell carrier spawn rates increased to improve pacing. So this just means that we're going to have better cell rates, so we're not going to be sitting around being like, when's that enemy going to spawn? So that's great for pacing. Reduced ranged enemy presence, increased enemy density, and reduced delay between reinforcements. Increased sack explosion radius from 10 to 13 meters. So I think this encounter is one that I actually did not do. So we will see how this goes. Like, increasing the enemy density and reducing the delay between reinforcements is a thing that I love across all of Warframe. So it sounds like a positive change, but I'm pretty sure I actually did not do this bounty, so I can't really have too much of an opinion on this one in particular. Let's move on to Necromec Changes. General Necromec Changes. Necromechs, Bone Widow, and Void Rig now have Vacuum. So that's great. Running around in them is just going to be... You're actually going to be able to collect loot reliably and still just be playing. Enemy Necromechs now have the Lich treatment with vulnerability to status effects. So this is going to matter a whole lot. Hopefully, you are not going to experience what I experienced with the Bone Widow enemy type, where they've got a shield, and they have the ability, because it's just an AI, to just always be looking at you, so you can't deal damage to them. that was really annoying. Hopefully the status effects are going to be able to at least like get behind that shield or something, so that we don't have a situation where the shield enemy just looks at you, because it has a complete 360 that it can turn on its torso. So we'll see if this helps with that, and this will definitely help with the first Necromech. Being vulnerable to status effects means it's going to be much easier to burn it down in general. Also, increase the shared affinity range in landscape missions to 250 meters from 50 to assist with all things leveling on landscapes. So, this is really good. I'm not sure if this is only for Necromechs. Like, I mean, it's under general Necromec changes, but just like increasing the shared affinity range in general in landscape missions would make sense, because it's just a naturally much larger area. But regardless, at the very least, this will help the Necromechs level on the landscape missions until we get the regular mission Necromech functionality, which is not coming with this update. Then Bone Widow changes in general. The first ability made it more responsive, added a damage buff to melee attacks while holding an enemy on Meat Hook. Meat Hook now only costs energy on a successful hit, and it does not cost energy to throw an enemy that is already held. So, basically, you're going to be able to grab an enemy to get a buff. We'll see how large that buff is. That buff is going to affect the ult of the Bone Widow, so that matters. So we'll see if this ability ends up being like a thing where you just grab any given enemy and you're like, I've got a damage buff now, which I think is probably where this is going to go. And then in addition to that, it'll also just be, you know, it's a fun throwing enemies around ability, so it doesn't need to be the best, most optimal thing. But it's good that it has a meaningful effect in increasing melee attack damage if it is a significant buff. Shield Maiden added Iron Skin style scaling, meaning all incoming damage right after the cast period scales the health of the Shield Maiden. That's good. Made the angle of the Shield Maiden's blocking angle more sensible for the front area of the Necromech. So this is probably a wider angle for the blocking. So that'll just mean you actually block damage more often, at least with the things that you're looking at. And then blocking with both Iron Bride and Shield Maiden will increase a blocking angle. So that's fine. Well, like, I mean, that's fine. It'll just give you more angle, which it was already improved with the previous change. Firing line energy cost reduced from 75 to 50. I still think that firing line is a hilarious ability that probably shouldn't be a thing. But it is what it is. It is enemy grouping. I think this ability needs to be like way more aggressive than it was on the test server, but like at least reducing its energy cost makes it less embarrassing to use. And then the very important part is the Exalted Iron Bride increase the damage overall for Exalted Iron Bride, since its attack speed is slower by design. Less energy is now required to sustain it. Slam attacks are better performing and more intuitive. So I would like to point out that like increase the damage overall, it matters. It does. But like the damage that this thing needs to do to be competitive is so high. And I don't want to say it's so high because like the other Necromech has a really good ult that does a lot of damage at range and it explodes. But like Iron Bride needs to do a metric fuck ton of damage in order to be competitive with the other Necromech. Like the other Necromech can do millions of damage. So whenever you need to get in melee range with a Necromech and then, you know, swing with sword on a smaller group of enemies than the explosions would hit from the other Necromech, this ability probably needs to be doing like 5 million damage a swing in order for you to have a reason to use it. Is a sword fun? Yes. But whenever you compare it to high explosive rounds fired at range, it needs to do more damage than that in order for it to be a thing that I care about using. So we'll see if that is the kind of increase that we are going to be getting, but I doubt it based on some of the other number changes that we saw with the Arcanes and stuff. But there were some tripling and stuff up there, so maybe it'll be pretty far up there. And then at the end, I'll just read this part. Not listed are the dozens and dozens of fixes included for launch on the more specific bugs and issues. A huge thanks goes out to the participants on the public test cluster for giving us so much to work with. We spent the week with our heads down, banging out as many meaningful changes that aligned with both the feedback received and our developmental goals. As is the way, things will still receive iteration and changes once our community at large is involved on PC and consoles. So, we will see where this stuff goes. Overall, I mean, they are trying to improve things. I think they were successful in making it so that Theorem Demulcent maybe possibly sees use. I really do think that they should make it so that the Exodias or at least for the residuals, having those be available to all guns, I think would really, really help a lot. Restricting the Arcanes to only kit guns hurts it immensely. And it also just hurts like diversity for the purposes of using these theorems, but I think that would be a hugely positive change in trying to get more people to care about having these, because if you could, you know, if you're going to use a residual on a bunch of your weapons anyway, because it's the only thing available to them, maybe the theorems become more appealing as well. So that's a potential thing. But I think Theorem Demulcent is the closest to being like maybe actually usable. So we'll see how that goes. And then like, you know, some weapon buffs here that I personally didn't feel like were necessary, but cool. I'm super down. I'm even more excited to try the Bubonico and the Proboscis Ceranos and stuff with these added changes. So that's nice. I guess I want to use the weapons even more now. And then as for the Warframe changes, I will test the Zephyr stuff, but in general, it feels like these changes don't really push us into a direction that is more helpful to those frames, with the possible exception of Zephyr, you know, barring testing. But yeah, overall, like, you know, they are trying to make the update better, and that is good, because it was going to be real rough in the state that things were in prior. So we'll see how it is whenever it launches, which might be like very soon. Like, they put these out, maybe it's launching later today. It's like midday right now, so like we could see it. Maybe it's launching tomorrow. Who can say? Maybe it's next week. But yeah, I will be streaming that whenever it comes out. So I will see you guys later. Thank you for hanging out and going over these changes and stuff with me. Hope you enjoyed the video. Bye, everybody.